Here is your first question. Can you explain how you will determine whether an issue requires legislative action if elected? Please be specific. Ms. Branstetter.
Normally in legislative action, it always...
Let's use the microphone.
Normally in legislative action, it always states what action is going to be taken in the bill or who takes that action. If it's for, perhaps they're going to form a tax committee, the tax committee has actions. It states in the legislation what their task is to do. If they are to report, if they are to prepare a budget, they have to prepare a budget by a certain time frame. So normally when you prepare legislation, you have all those actions that you want done in the bill, specific to tell the individuals what they are to do.
Thank you. And if anyone at any time wants me to repeat the question, we'll do that. Ms. Miller.
I believe the first thing that needs to happen before any legislation is even proposed is we need to go back and check the laws that actually apply to the legislation, how it will play out, and also we need to observe federal laws and see where that applies to the Osage Nation with regard to, sometimes I believe what we're doing here is passing legislation that really isn't even necessary because it's already covered under the federal law. And then we have some probably that maybe should even be in the legislation instead of as law. So I feel like what really needs to happen is we need to do a lot of research into whether or not this law is really going to benefit the people, if we're wasting our time and money and effort before we do it. My opinion is research, 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 and then do it. We can make laws all day long, but a bad law is a bad law. So, in my opinion, we need to make good, sturdy, dependable laws. So, let's not get in a hurry to make it. That's my answer, but I do want to give my compliments to the chef and his crew. I want to thank the ladies with the Women League of Voters and all the people that have come to see us, especially the Osage News. They're doing an outstanding job and they're working very hard during this election time, as is the election board. Thank you.
Ms. Shaw.
I think that one of the things before we start doing legislation is how it benefits the people, number one. Number two, is this a law or is it a policy and procedure issue that could be handled by executive? And how will it benefit the people? And most of the people, not just some of the people, but most of the people. I'm familiar with Robert's Rules of Order. I think that needs to be respected. And I think the legislation needs to come derived from the people and not necessarily from the legislature. If the legislatures have an issue that they think needs to be brought to the front in the way of legislation, then they need to discuss it. I would have a town hall and discuss it, because generally there's more than one item on it, and see if the people are for it, and if they're not, why, and base my decision on that. Communication is one of our biggest assets, and we're not utilizing it very well. And I think that if the people, we're here for the people, they voted for us, and the legislation is for the people, the majority of the people. And I feel that we as legislators should remember that, and that we follow all procedures stated in the Constitution to introduce a bill and follow it through according to the Constitution.
Thank you. Mr. Hamilton.
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. Can you explain how you will determine whether an issue requires legislative action if elected? Please be specific.
legislative action would be, how critical the law that would require action. If it's getting our casinos into trust, that would be very critical, and we could put that at the top of our slate. And with communication with the people, they will let us know how they really feel.
Thank you. And Ms. Lazelle. Sure. Can you explain how you will determine whether an issue requires legislative action if elected? Please be specific.
I would like to talk about explaining if any type of initiative needs action. If it comes from the public, if you out there say, I'd like to see this happen, and you create a law that comes to the legislator, you have to find somebody to sponsor the legislation. They say, yes, I believe in that. And then they will talk with the people, the staff up there, and they will formulate the law. It's filed, it's introduced on the floor. There's a great opportunity for each one of you to come in at that time if you think that the legislation has some controversy to it. Now, as a legislator, if we find that some of the legislation is very controversial, we can have public hearings. And that's where you, as the Osage people, are invited to attend to hear those comments. And you guide us through that process if that is legislation that requires action. Of course, if it's a constitutional legislation, our reference is the Constitution, necessary laws to enforce the Constitution. If there are appropriation budgets, great examination comes with that so that we can have a fiscal analysis of that cost if we do the budget. So I'm hoping that I've explained that well enough to all of you so that you'll know that there is a part in that legislators don't dominate. We can actually have public hearings and turn that back to you for your input. Thank you.
All right, everyone's had a chance to answer the question. Is there anyone that wants to use their 1-minute rebuttal time? Ms. Branstetter.
The way I explained it is if any congressperson has legislation that they wish to bring, it could be initiated by them, it can be initiated by any individual. But once that legislation is formed, then it has a first reading in Congress in session. Once it has the first reading, then the Speaker sends it to the Committee of Jurisdiction. Once it goes to the Committee of Jurisdiction, then any of the public is invited and the executive comes over and to review that law. And from there, then it goes and you can have amendments to the bill. Maybe it might not even come out of committee. That doesn't mean that it's going to be law just because it was introduced.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Miller.
I would like to add that I have watched this Congress for 5 good long years, constantly. And I guess the mic is not on. And so I would like to say, we can pass a law, but we can't just pass a law and drop it. You know, so you've got a piece of paper with a law on it. With that law has to come what we know as CFR, Code of Federal Regulations. We need to have our own regulations. We have to regulate that law in order to be able to enforce it. So we hear a lot about not having laws enforced. We cannot enforce them if the Congress does not go on through with making the regulations to the law.
Thank you. Anyone else? 1-minute rebuttal. Yes, Ms. Lazelle.
I would also like to add to the Osage people that there is also another opportunity for each of you to intercede on legislation, and that is requesting an amendment and a repeal law. That was one of the very first things on my foundation, is to establish a repeal law for those unconstitutional laws that exist right now. So you still have an opportunity to come in and participate in the amendment. Thank you.